Hi everybody, today we are joined by Mr. Simon Bolzoni, who is the founder of Canons Bespoke and a fabulous bespoke shoemaker, but also the gentleman that we have been collaborating with to make these, which is the Armoury and Canons collaboration footwear. Simon, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I know you have a very tight schedule because you've got actually more bespoke appointments coming up later today as well. Can you tell us a little about yourself? Can you tell us how you got into this?
I started almost 20 years ago. I got interested in the fact that there was still some London bespoke shoemakers, just a handful. And yeah, I just started reading. There was only really literature that was written in Victorian times. There wasn't YouTube and so on and so forth. So I found some old books. I took myself and just went for a walk down to the West End and just walked into all the shoemaking firms that were still going. And basically just offered my services. And that's where I met Terry Moore in Foster & Son. And we had a chat. We're from the same part of East London. And we sort of hit it off. And he said, oh, I really, I want to sort of, train you up and see how you get on. So that's how I started.
And you have to explain who Terry Moore is, because I think there are a lot of people who aren't aware of how important Terry is.
Yeah, well, I was very lucky because back in sort of 20 years ago, there's still a couple of master shoemakers left. And Terry Moore basically is considered to be probably one of the greats, if not the greatest, master last maker. So he was still working for Foster & Son at the time. So I was very, very fortunate enough to be able to be trained by him.
Wow.
Which took some time, and you've got to, work sort of side by side for quite a considerable amount of time.
How long were you in training for with him?
It takes, it still feels like I'm in training now, but you need to spend at least a couple of years just working side by side. So the master would make the left or right foot, and then you'd copy it. So you kind of work like that for some time until you get to be allowed to work on the pair.
I see. And this was starting with lasts?
Yeah. I mean, I got into it thinking I wanted to be a shoemaker. I didn't actually really know a hell of a lot about lasts. So there's not really that much written about it. It's a bit more mysterious. So I thought, oh, well, I'll start doing that and then maybe I'll be a shoemaker later. But as soon as I started doing it, it was just perfect for me. And I just sort of really loved it from the minute I started. So I just feel very, very privileged to have sort of had that journey. So.
Can you break that down a little bit? Like last makers, shoemakers.
Yeah, so some people maybe don't realise, but the whole process is divided up into sort of certain skills, and last making is the first part of the process. The person who's the last maker generally should be the person who meets the client, measures, so you need to understand measuring, and they then take those measurements and reinterpret them in a way that by carving a block of wood into a form that the shoe then is made on top of. So it's essentially like sculpting. There's some level of like customer service. You have to understand people. You're designing the whole shape of the shoe, and it's the fit of the shoe as well. The next part of the process is pattern making. That's probably, I'd say, the second most important part of the process, which is a whole different skill. It's designing the three-dimensional shape on top of the last. Then the next part is clicking, which is cutting the leather, which is comes just before closing, which is fine needlework, basically sewing the upper leather together to create an upper, which then gets given to the shoemaker that lasts the upper over the shoe and ties that upper to the insole. And eventually, once you've done a fitting, we'll then put the bottom on, put the outsole on, and it all gets hand stitched together. And they're all very, very highly skilled jobs, and they're quite different skills, because you imagine one's wood and then other parts are sort of literally design and needlework and leather work. So they're very different skills, and it's better when someone just focuses on one of them, in my opinion. But so I think I was very lucky. I got to do what ended up being a perfect sort of position for me. So
that's fair. And Going from Terry Moore and your early days at Foster and Sons to Canon Bespoke, what was that journey?
It's quite an interesting journey, yeah, because I started off literally just, with, just an apprentice, essentially. I put everything into it. I'd come from a little bit more of like a retail background and a bit more fashion and things like that. So I got quite involved with the ready-to-wear side of the business as well as doing the bespoke. So at that early stage, I actually started redeveloping the ready-to-wear shoes we were having made in Northampton straight away, as well as learning bespoke last making. And it just was very interesting sort of way of doing things, I guess. So I wasn't just in the workshop. I really enjoyed being on the shop floor as well. I just eventually became the manager of the store. Not too far after that, became the managing director. We opened a factory in Northampton. I was quite heavily involved in that, developing lasts for ready-to-wear, which is very interesting, developing styles and designs. And then eventually ended up buying the Foster & Son business, which was about a year ago now. And not too far after that, decided to change the name and rebrand it because I thought it was a better opportunity at that point, because whereas since the 1960s, we've been making ready-to-wear shoes alongside our bespoke, and we were kind of very well known for that. A couple of years ago, I decided to stop doing that. And so it just drew a line under that part of the history, I guess. And no disrespect to the Foster's brand or anything like that, and we still have that, but it just allowed us just to kind of clean that sort of side of the history up a little bit, and just to every single shoe that comes out of our firm now has never had up until now a ready-to-wear version or anything like that, and we can just really focus now on bespoke. It was just, and also everyone thought I was maybe a sixth generation Foster, or it was part of my family history, and so that kind of confused things as well. So just another way of just sort of like making it less confusing.
I mean, it was it was an interesting break for you from Foster too, because you're now in Islington.
Yes,
which is not usually where you find fine bespoke shoemakers either.
No, well, funnily enough, if you actually look into the history of Foster's, which I have done, there was a Foster's shoemaker just round the corner from where our workshop is now.
No way.
And if you go back to like the 1800s,
right.
So some of the Foster family had shoemakers we're very close to a road called Essex Road. It was on that road.
Wow.
So it was less than 100 metres from where we are now, just by total chance. But I think sometimes these things just work out that way, and they find their way home. Yeah. But the majority of the history of Foster's is a West End shoemaker, that's right. So it does seem maybe sort of strange for us to move. But the decision to move was really to have a bigger workshop. And our workshop in Jermyn Street, which was lovely and very quaint, it was quite small. It was inadequate to make the sort of shoes we want to make now. Yeah. So now we have a space that's about 3-4 times bigger. And you just can't find a space like that in the West End. It just doesn't. The landlords won't have businesses like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, London rent is London rent, as we all know. And tell us what you're trying to design, trying to make now, under Canons, under your name. Yeah.
So I'm keeping very true to the West End heritage and our thing. I think that's the foundation of what we're doing. Foster's had its own version of West End style, which was quite understated, less sort of pedestrian, not too sporty, but had like a sort of like quite an elegant, understated look that was mainly developed really from Terry Moore and his long period of being the sole last maker there. But he did inherit some of that from when he came over from Peel & Co, because that's where he was beforehand. So I guess our heritage is a mixture of that. We also at one point were the Henry Maxwell workshop. Terry came from Peel & Co, like I mentioned, and that shut down in the 50s. And I have now all of the Peel lasts that's part of some of the archive we have of lasts. So I guess it's a little bit of a mixture, but because I learned from Foster's, I think its truest sort of connection is to that.
Having these old lasts, what's the importance of them?
Well, I mean, obviously, most of them are still for customers that we have to service their shoes. But I have probably about 3,000 in a storage unit, and it's just, you can go back 100 odd or more than 100 years, and you can take inspiration, especially if you're a last maker, in just the way that whoever the craftsman was problem solved a particular foot type, for example, and balanced a toe shape with a certain foot type. And so for me, it's like a really important part of like, I can tap into that as our sort of knowledge of, styles. And styles change, even though it is a heritage brand, really, I guess, and things move a bit slower than the fashion brand. The styles do change. For example, things are going maybe a bit away from sharper chisel toes now, and people are having more almond toes, slightly more rounded shapes, and things like that. So those shapes were still around, and in the turn of last century, and they weren't all these very sort of elongated shapes either.
And your time at Foster doing ready to wear actually had quite an impact on the lasts you make today too, right?
Yeah, in a way it did actually, because when you're a bespoke last maker, you can only make so many lasts a year. So there's a much smaller volume of fittings that happen. And I mean, if you're the only last maker, then obviously you have, you see far more feet and fits than somebody else. But if you're one of many other last makers, then, you don't have a lot of volume going through. When you're doing ready to wear, it's just, you just see more feet being fit in certain shoe shapes. And you get to understand, a bit more about the mechanics of a foot really in a fixed last, if you see what I mean, because a ready-to-wear last is fixed. So that's definitely really was helpful for me, I think, in my journey over the last all these years. So most last makers don't have that experience, unfortunately, but I think it is an important experience.
I think it's fascinating. How would you characterize a Canons shoe today?
I think they're understated. I think we're not trying to scream and shout. I think we're trying to make something very tasteful and timeless. I don't really think you can, we're not trying to make recreations of 1920s shoes or anything like that. But I think we're trying to make something that's relevant, that people can wear now, and feel comfortable and look good, and look refined. I think what we're trying to do with each individual customer is make the best version we can for them. So we're not trying to create a very dominant style that everyone comes and gets from us. It's very subtle. If you look at the shoes we're making, it has to be balanced with the foot. Yeah. So I think we really specialize in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a customer, and I'm very pleased with the loafer you made. And you're right. It's a beautiful balance, and it's not overly refined. It's quite modern.
Yeah.
I feel like, especially right now, just the age of like very fine, very refined shoes isn't quite what the world's looking for.
No,
not for the time being, at least.
Yeah, not for now. I think that look comes around every so often. I've been doing this long enough to see it come around about twice now. But it was quite big about 10 years ago to see the very, very chiseled shapes.
Yeah.
And it gets a bit overdone. I mean, from my perspective, I see it. It's just, not to say that we don't do those styles, but even with our house style, we never really did a very, very sharp chisel.
Yeah.
How I was taught to do it was to make something sharp and then to sort of almost like have some entropy go over it, where it's sort of like got softened. And so our house style with a chisel shape was always soft chisel. It doesn't have those sharp edges.
Yeah, it's kind of organic. Actually. Yeah, a lot of your shapes are very organic.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a Zen art in that sense. Like it kind of like, it just has sort of like, I mean, I kind of try to imagine, I guess it's like how a stone gets sort of softened by water over time. Or I guess it's a bit like that. It's sort of, you can't really, like how Terry taught me, there aren't no straight lines in nature. And so you're trying to make a very natural shape that flows through from the heel through to the toe. And when I'm working, I'm not just working on the heel and then the toe and then I'm actually flowing through the last round and round and working sort of like around it until I come down to the final shape. So that ends up, you get a more natural look to the last rather than just getting the fit and then putting a toe on the end. Chisel toes are actually quite easy to do because you just, they're straight lines. Whereas when you're making something softer, it's quite tricky. So it's quite challenging to do that.
For the bespoke business now, for the Canons bespoke business now, how many pairs are you making a year?
Yeah, we have capacity to make a couple of hundred pairs.
Okay.
So that's sort of where we are really. And I don't really want to go beyond that. It means that we can really make sure the quality and the consistency is very high.
Yeah.
There are only so many people that we would even take on to be on part of our team. My broader team is about a dozen people. I probably will bring on a few more people when I find the right ones.
Right.
But that gives us enough capacity to make a few hundred pairs.
Wow.
And until I get the right people, then I won't add to that. It's not a high volume business at all.
And so obviously the hope is you do a trunk show with us, but you also visit various places in the world. You're also able to take appointments in your showroom in London as well.
Yeah, exactly. So most people like to come over actually if they're in town. So it's the way we design the new showroom is to, from my experience of actually the workshop we had in Jermyn Street, we had the shop front, but the workshop was upstairs. Everyone loved getting involved in the workshop upstairs, even though it was quite small. And that's where people found themselves to be more creative when they were designing their shoes. So when I designed the workshop we have now, rather than create like a shop front and then sort of that sort of thing, we just basically said, okay, let's just fill the space with the workshop. And then when clients come in, they're inside of the workshop and they feel more like, it's just more creative. People love it. So, and
it's like a studio.
Yeah.
It feels like a studio in the best way possible. You have the leathers hanging on the edge, you have the guys working, you have your last making equipment right in the front, which I think is always a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, thanks. That's mainly actually because of the light. The light comes very south-facing, so the light's at the front, and I need to look at it in quite fine detail, so it helps with that. Hanging the leathers was inspired by the English oak bark tan leathers, which get hung when they're put in the pit tans, the pits when they're tan, sorry. And so I always thought that was kind of a nice thing where people can now look through the leathers hung up rather than them all being rolled up. And then, so you can we've done it color coded, and it's just a nicer way to kind of just look at leather and sort of pick out. Now you can just look at it color coded and then find texture rather than just going through all these rolls and things.
Yeah. Yeah, you can browse it almost like a huge book.
Yeah, I mean, we can get them out and just put them on our big worktop. We've got this sort of quite large workbench in the middle, so people get it out. And I mean, we also make cases, so people also like to position where they have the front of their case and the back and stuff like that. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the samples on the table. They're all fabulous.
Yeah, I picked a few out. We usually bring over about somewhere between 20 and 30 when we come on a trip, just as many as we can take. And I picked out these particular ones, just some of them for, are just our best sellers. I mean, this particular shoe, we make these all day long. This is one of our most popular shoes, even more so since people's styles maybe changed over the last couple of years. But it's nice and rugged. It goes with nearly everything.
What do you call a style like this?
It's a derby. We've got this blind seam here at the front and a storm welt, which is like a Norwegian storm welt, which is particular to bespoke shoemaking, hand welting. There's a quite heavy sole. It's got like a leather sole with midsole, and the colour has been sort of like aged by the sun actually. So we
How old is that sample actually?
This I think is from the 60s by the font on this this on the label here. Yeah, the plate there. So I think this is 1960s. So this would have been when we first moved to Jermyn Street. Some of the shoes are older than that. So for example, this shoe is pre-1960s.
This has an interesting story too.
Yeah,
I heard you mentioning it to Elliot a second ago.
Yeah, so for any jazz lover, this is the shoe that we made for Oscar Peterson, so the pianist, and so this was his favourite shoe to actually play, and so he had a suede version of this that we made him several times, and with a thinner sole actually than this, so a lighter sole, lighter construction. This is more for everyday use, and with this sole width. But yeah, so that's got a nice history. We've got his lasts in the workshop in London. So yeah, it's one of my favourite sort of stories, really, that. But we've got some really interesting other.
You mentioned like he sometimes asked for a thinner sole so he could feel the piano pedals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just get more of a feel for the pedal.
Man.
So yeah, I mean,
What do you call this actually? This style?
It's got a bit of a mouthful of a name. Our house name for it is called a front spring monk.
Okay.
And so anything with elastication in Foster & Son has the word spring in the name. So the reason why it's called a front spring is because there's a piece of elastic here. So it's front sprung.
Right.
And the reason why it's called a monk is because it's in the same family as like a monk strap.
I see.
So it's the opposite of a derby. So there's only really like a couple of styles of shoe.
Right.
There's Oxfords, which is that, and then there's derbies, and then there's loafers. And so monks are in the derby family. Side elastics would be in the Oxford family, and then loafers are on their own. And so every single shoe is basically a version of these. And so if you look at so anything with elastication, this is a front spring monk. If we had a side spring shoe, which like one I'm wearing, it's called a side spring shoe for that reason. Yeah. So
Fantastic.
That's our house name for it.
Should we have a little look at this?
Yeah, for sure.
So explain this.
So the inspiration was from this sample actually. So that's one of our most popular shoes, and so when we looked to do something that was in keeping with our house style, it seemed like the really most obvious place to start was with this shoe because it's one of our sort of favourite samples. So we took this design, and the last this has been made on is the 05 last, which is similar to this, and it's a nice round toe. The 05 is the name of the number 05 comes from us being in before we were in Jermyn Street, we were in 5 Duke of York Street. That was our previous workshop, which was around the corner. And the 05 is basically a reference to that. And so it's like that classic, what's our classic round toe shape. So
typically for like derbies, for Oxfords as well? Or?
Perfect for derbies and Oxfords, yeah. It's really easy toe. It's not too sharp, but it still has an elegance to it.
Yeah.
So it lends itself to the style. It's storm welted, like this is storm welted. So you've got that sort of like a little bit of weight to it. So it just sort of balances it nicely. We've got the back tab here, which is the same as this. We've taken that feature. The only difference we did was we decided to do like an overlaid facing here, rather than going for this blind seam, just to kind of like give it a little bit of a slightly fresher look, and something just that's a bit different. So we just moved it forward a little bit in that sense. But yeah, I mean,
I love it. It's
very
one of my
close.
favorite shoes in the collection right now. It's awesome.
Yes, so like, yeah, I mean, it's really sort of easy and sort of, versatile.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty relevant, I think. People can wear that with most things, I think, now.
What leather would you like to see this in future, actually?
I mean, it does look good in these tans.
It does, yeah.
And we've got like quite a, we develop our colours ourselves. We use like a particular type of leather, which allows us to sort of add pigments to the leather. And so we have quite a spectrum of tan colours. And yeah, anything that's sort of like that kind of colour definitely looks good. Yeah, works with greys and blues and all sorts of things like that. Yeah, we often make it, you often in Bespoke, people will ask for it in this. It looks great in oxblood, actually, a bit like more modern, and it looks great in black, actually, and that's quite a modern look because it's quite sort of robust looking, a bit sharper, but it definitely works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, keep it in mind. Listen, thank you so much for working with us on developing these shoes. Like, I really appreciate it because it's a really wonderful collection. I can't wait to see what we do together next. And hopefully we'll be able to welcome you at the store for trunk shows as well in the future, right?
Thank you. That'd be great.
All right. Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. Safe travels back to the UK.
Yeah, thanks.
And speak again soon. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.